Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to break down Mikel Arteta's tactics and analyze how Arsenal were able to comfortably defeat Norwich. When we break down the game and we do look at the board, we saw Norwich dropping off in more of a 4-1-4-1, and Arsenal reverted to a 3-4-3 that for large spells looked like a 3-4-1-2, with Lacazette dropping deeper in search of the ball, while you had Aubameyang and Nelson towards the fullbacks looking to break him behind. When we break down how Arsenal were able to win this game, first we have to look at the way that they approached the game without the ball. They pressed high to ensure that Norwich, a team who likes to build from the back, wouldn't be able to do so, and they were largely successful in doing that. When Norwich looked to split the center backs, they had Nelson and Aubameyang push out to them, and then Lacazette could stick towards Tyrrell. And then from there, you could see how they were able to close down efficiently. They had the wingbacks stepping out to the fullbacks, they had the midfield shuttlers stepping out into the path of Rope and McLean, and then they had the back three closing out Buendia, Cantwell, and Pukki. Norwich struggled to bypass that press throughout that opening half, and the one thing that you could say from Daniel Farke's men is that they could have had the front three dropping off into that midfield zone to get away from Arsenal's center backs, but when they did do that, that ultimately led to Arsenal's opening goal. When we break it down, you see Cantwell dropping off into that midfield zone, dragging out Mustafi, and then when you look higher up the pitch, you end up seeing Ceballos close to Tyrrell and Lacazette not marking anyone. Those two players instantly swarm Cantwell when he receives the ball away from Mustafi, and that forces Cantwell to play the ball into Aarons. That's where you see Arsenal's press effectively utilized once again, because Tierney steps into the path of Aarons, and then Kolasinac instantly steps out into the path of Buendia, forcing that ball back into Godfrey where Aubameyang is close to him. So when Godfrey plays the ball back to Krul, that leads to the mistake that puts Arsenal ahead. Besides that, Norwich only threatened that Arsenal goal from long-range shots. But prior to that goal, this game was about how Arsenal would break down that Norwich 4-1-4-1, and there were two ways that they could go about it. We saw when they looked to try and press from the front, they would have Buendia and Cantwell step into the path of Mustafi and Kolasinac, but when they dropped off a bit deeper, they kept their base shape, and when you look at how Arsenal were approaching that game from an attacking standpoint, there was also times where you could see the Norwich shuttler stepping out to the center backs. There was one time in particular where you saw Lacazette pushing higher ahead of the center backs, so Tyrrell could step out into the path of Ceballos, and that allowed McLean to step into the path of Mustafi. The only reason why Mustafi was able to get out of that press was because Aubameyang made a run across Aarons, and that created the avenue for Tierney to break down that left-hand side. There were areas where the Gunners could exploit, because Norwich dropped off deeper and they didn't have any press on those three center backs that looked to push forward. Pukki was ahead of David Luiz because of his passing range, but when you look at that midfield zone, it was interesting. Lacazette does operate as a hold-up striker, so it would make sense for him to be a bit deeper to look to combine with the midfield and hold-up play, but that's where you ended up seeing Aubameyang and Reiss Nelson on the shoulder of the fullbacks and Lewis and Aarons looking to make runs in behind. Aubameyang was looking to run across Aarons, but there were times where you did see him drift across Godfrey so that he could create a passing lane for Tierney. Because with that 4-1-4-1 shape, yes, Norwich did a good job of ensuring that Ceballos and Xhaka couldn't get on the ball in that midfield zone freely, and then you had Tyrrell looking to close down Lacazette. Although Lacazette did shift to the right and to the left of him, but the area of weakness that Mikel Arteta did target was the fact that Buendia and Cantwell didn't want to track the runs of Tierney and Bellerin. So when we look to the left-hand side, what you ended up seeing was that you had Aubameyang looking to make runs across Aarons, but there was also times where he did look to shift across Godfrey, and that created a lane for Tierney to push beyond Buendia, who wasn't tracking his movement. It could be through Kolasinac playing that pass out into that zone, or we saw David Luiz and Mustafi hitting out diagonal balls. Initially, what it looked like was that they were looking to wrap the ball around Buendia to pull out Aarons and then have Aubameyang break into that space, but Godfrey did a very good job of shifting over into that pass. path. So they needed Aubameyang to make darting runs across Aarons and Godfrey to create that passing lane for Tierney. But the problem was that whenever Arsenal consistently played balls out into that zone, Tierney's pullbacks didn't connect with his teammates. Still, Arsenal were able to double their lead from a similar pattern down that left-hand side, and the only difference here was that we ended up seeing Rupp stepping out into the path of David Luiz, but blocking off the passing lane into Xhaka. Pukki wasn't getting tight on David Luiz, and that allowed David Luiz to still play a diagonal ball over Buendia into the path of Tierney. But when Aaron steps towards Tierney, what we also see here is that Xhaka continues his movement into that Norwich third beyond Tribal. So when you end up seeing Aaron step out into the path of Tierney, he plays the ball around him into the path of Aubameyang darting into that space. But this time with Godfrey and Buendia looking to track back to close down Aubameyang, he's able to quickly play a reverse pass in between those two players for Xhaka breaking freely into the box, and he was able to sweep Arsenal to a 2-goal lead. Meanwhile, down the right-hand side, we witnessed something similar with Bellerin making runs in beyond Cantwell and Lewis, but it did involve Ceballos dropping off a bit deeper to play in his teammate, and we also did see some varied movement from Ceballos and Nelson. Nelson would look to drop off deeper ahead of Lewis and then spin in behind him, or he would look to drop ahead of Cantwell, who wasn't even looking to track the run of Bellerin. And you would also see Ceballos shifting out into that right channel to pull out McLean, and that creates a passing avenue to find Bellerin making those darting runs in behind. There was a time where we ended up seeing Ceballos drop off deeper towards the halfway line and get a pass from David Luiz, and then you saw Nelson dropping off a bit deeper to pull out Cantwell. When Ceballos receives that ball, he ends up splitting McLean and Cantwell and Lewis and Tete for Bellerin breaking in behind, and that's an example as to how Arsenal were able to utilize their fullbacks. So as you can see, Arteta identified a clear weakness in that Norwich setup by having Nelson and Aubameyang drift narrow and then creating an avenue for the wingbacks to push high, knowing that Buendia and Cantwell wouldn't want to track their runs. The fact that Norwich didn't press high allowed the center backs to play out those diagonal balls, and then they were able to have Xhaka and Ceballos drop off deeper away from pressure, specifically Ceballos, to serve as a creative outlet for those wingbacks pushing beyond. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.